What's the worst place you have laughed uncontrollably? Walmart. There were 2 stalls in the back bathroom. I had to take a huge crap and ran in. Before I could comfortably let it all loose, another guy runs in and takes the stall next to mine. So we're both trying to be quiet poopers when the guy next to me finally whispers no to himself before letting out a little squeak of flatulence, which made me giggle really hard and made me defecate with a flatulent pop. It was quiet for like 1.5 seconds and then both me and the guy in the next stall start laughing uncontrollably while crapping and letting the most undescribable sounds leave our asses for what must have been a good minute or two. After it was over, there was awkward silence of paper being torn and applied gently, and then we realized we were both done. But neither of us actually wanted to meet, so he just says you first. So I left the stall, washed my hands, and as I left the bathroom I heard his stall open. I never looked back, but I think about it often. TLDR, a guy and I pooped while laughing in a bathroom at the same time. A+ would read while pooping again. Next to a dead body, elderly lady had fallen out of bed, lit a cigarette and promptly died. She had such a pee-off look on her face, like great, fell out of bed, can't get up, and what's this? A heart attack? Well, why the frick not? In a staff meeting when they told us the store was closing and we would all be losing out jobs. It was the first mandatory full staff meeting in the 2 years I had been there. Usually the warehouse area where I worked would do those things separately. I was joking in the carpool to work that we were all getting laid off in one go to save time, and when we get there the big boss has tissue boxes lining the meeting table. I knew I was right and immediately starting giggling like an idiot. I kept it together kinda until they announced the layoffs and then I lost it. Other people were in tears for losing their jobs, but the whole thing was weirdly hilarious to me. I was interviewing a woman for a part-time job in our office when I realized that if you dipped her in blue paint, she would be the spitting image of Nanny Smurf. I started to crack up and realized I was going to lose it in front of her, so I told her I was having an allergy attack. I ran to the bathroom and laughed my head off, went back and finished the interview. Heathrow Airport sometime in the 90s. There was a 1-minute silence for Princess Diana. My girlfriend burst into uncomfortable laughter. It was so infectious that I ended up in fits of laughter. I still feel bad. To the tower with him. Went to a friend's church when I was 20 and at one part of the service people started standing up sharing their struggles. Lots of tears. Really somber mood. Lady in front of me stands up and she's ugly, crying, snorting, sniffling, voice cracking and squeaking, and it struck me as funny. I started giggling, so I bent over in the pew to make it look like I was crying. My redneck friend, sitting beside me, started patting my back and rubbing my shoulders comfortingly, which made it even funnier, and I started belly laughing, but all bent over, covering my face. It looked like I was absolutely falling apart, and trying to hold it in, I started to make my own weird gasping, snorting sounds. My friend never knew until years later when I was telling the story at a party. My wedding vows. Husband got through his, then hit a giggle loop that had me struggling to get through mine, to the point where I was a little late on a few responses and my dad asked mom, is she crying? Number. She's laughing. Oh, I did that too. Husband here. Wife hit me in the ribs, so imperceptible but so hard, and that only made it worse. In my defense, it wasn't my fault. I wasn't nervous nor anything like that. The official performing the ceremony had this very distinctive old FM kinda night show DJ deep voice, and I couldn't keep my face straight. My dad's funeral. It started with the honor guard got lost between the funeral home and cemetery, and we saw them turn into the cemetery on 2 wheels right before the hearse got there. It grew when the shells from the 21 gun salute fell out of the flag when they handed it to my mom. Then we got stranded in the cemetery because the limo wouldn't start after the service and almost everyone else was gone. We spent 10-15 minutes just laughing in the cemetery. We all figured that dad couldn't have planned it better. Gal in my small town was murdered. News film crews filmed us arriving. I laughed because I was nervous. They didn't broadcast that clip, thankfully. When the small turboprop plane hit really bad turbulence and dropped a bit, ladies screamed. Children cried. I was laughing hysterically. Wife was unimpressed, which of course made the laughing worse. 10/10. This reminds me of being in a small boat in pretty rough waters. It was a tourist transfer boat, held about 12-15 people. Everyone around me was screaming or vomiting. My wife was yelling that we were going to capsize and die. I was laughing my head off, getting soaked, and clinging on for dear life. It was hilarious to me for some reason. Well, it wasn't uncontrollable, but there were a lot of laughs at my mom's funeral. My grandmother, who was 96 at the time, and having a bit of dementia, said out loud, "Oh, you shut your mouth," when the priest started his prayers. It actually lightened up a grim room. At my mother's baptism, my mother was raised Catholic but grew away from the church for various reasons over the years, but she became very active at her local Baptist church and decided to officially convert. They held a huge ceremony during the Sunday morning service, and the whole family showed up to support her. Well, there is always music and singing, and being a fairly large church, they had a band with a multitude of instruments. There was this one freaking guy, and his job was to play the chimes. You know, the different ones hanging on strings all in a row? Well, let me tell you, this guy loved to play the freaking chimes. It was his only job. He did it with such flourish. He would shove his hand into the air before swooping into the hanging bars of metal. Did you know that he was also able to incorporate chimes into multiple points of all the songs played? Well, he did. Chim us all day. The first time it happened, my husband and I locked eyes in the pew. That was it, we freaking lost it. And he kept doing it, song after song. We could not get control of ourselves. My father, sitting behind us, was furious. Dang, I would go to church just to watch the chime guy. That's how they get you. My parents switched to a progressive non-denominational church after I moved out, and I would watch the electric guitar player straight up slaying it out there. My boss gave a talk to a squad of disabled athletes in wheelchairs, and not only did he say that it's important to put your best foot forward, but he also said, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. I had to leave the room. This one time at a funeral, my cousins and I saw an older gentleman approach the casket. It was an open casket, and he started talking. No big deal, but what he said killed us. It was something like, "Hey Jude, I'd ask how you're doing, but you're dead." I had my 4-year-old daughter stand up and sing one "If You're Happy and You Know It, Clap Your Hands" at my grandpa's funeral. Apparently she wanted to sing as well to the hymns but didn't know the words. Funny thing is, my grandpa would have been the first to laugh at that. In a haunted horror maze, the owners and actors clearly put a lot of time and effort into making it look and feel incredible. But on the first jump scare, my adrenaline spiked and I couldn't control the constant laughter that followed me the rest of the way. Absolutely shattered the tension for everyone. At my roommate's father's funeral, extremely depressing because his father took his own life. However, there was an old fella in attendance who let out the slowest, clappiest fart of all time. I couldn't help myself. At the funeral for one of my wife's cousins, we watched a boxer take a huge dump while the University of Oklahoma fight song was playing. Completely lost it. Boxer the kind of dog. BTW. Back of an 8th grade classroom during a presentation. I'm bullshitting with my friend because I'm kind of a dong. Meanwhile, our student presenter has a small but noticeable speech impediment. Every couple of words, he has to pause and catch his breath mid-word. Thank you. While not paying attention to the presentation, my friend made me laugh, which happened to coincide perfectly with one of the pauses. I immediately feel an entire classroom of eyes on me as I try to look innocent and point at my friend as the object of laughter. But it was too late. No way to talk yourself out of that mess. A friend of mine spaced out during a conversation between his brother and a couple from Asia. He remembered something funny and giggled right after the man said, "And that's when they killed our daughter." National Healthcare Conference Award ceremony was in a huge banquet hall and there was an open wine bar. 2 ladies and I got a little sloshed and started playing I Never at Our Table. Very inappropriate giggling pursued. For the next hour, surrounded by hospital executives, was also an intern at the time, trying to get a permanent job. Kinda stupid. Open bars are the downfall of professionalism. Yesterday during yoga, one of the girls that I invited fell asleep in the first sitting pose. We're standing there doing sun salutations and she's still sitting there asleep af. I busted out laughing and couldn't stop. I was laughing uncontrollably when a man let out a super huge fart in yoga. I had to leave. I couldn't stay for the rest of the class. When I was in 5th grade, the police officers of my town came to the school to give us a talk about road safety. They suddenly showed us an image of a person dodging a train, and I started laughing while the rest of the class was in silence. The teacher decided to kick me out of the class and made me wait in the corridor. My grandma's funeral. She was wearing a brooch that was given to her on a previous birthday. We played a joke on her before she was given the brooch and her reaction was hilarious. I walked up and looked at her, saw the brooch and just started laughing. I got yelled at a bunch. Once I explained, everyone laughed a little also. At my son's funeral, my daughter, 10 at the time, got her hair caught in my niece's earring while my daughter was resting her head on her cousin's shoulder. It was a nice 5-minute laughing session by the three of us, but people behind us thought we were crying. I laughed at my wife's father's funeral, but only because her very overdramatic sister, who I was told would make a scene, and hadn't been to visit him in over a year despite living 10 minutes away, goes died Nuru as soon as the priest guy was done with his speech. Thankfully I only snickered, but my wife's brother about peed himself laughing. Funeral for my ex-husband's grandma. My son was only 6 weeks old and hadn't pooped in a few days. My ex was holding him, standing beside me as the priest was doing the eulogy. My son finally released his several days worth of poop, which was significant enough that we referred to it as a poonami. It wasn't super loud, but I could hear it standing right there, and it went on for quite a while. My ex and I looked at each other and started silently laughing so hard, trying to hold it in. Later people came up to us to express their condolences, thinking we had been sobbing not laughing. Poonami is a great word that I now cannot wait to use. Here's a word of advice. Don't attend a car crash as part of a first date. Back when I was first trying my hand at online dating, I made plans to meet up with a young woman at a coffee shop near a beach. Like many such doomed from the start affairs, this one began with a lot of small talk, a discussion about the surrounding area, and a couple of allegedly humorous misunderstandings. For a little while, it seemed like it was going to be an unremarkable excursion. But just as the conversation was actually getting started, we were interrupted by the loud screech, pop, and crunch of a fishtailing car plowing into a nearby tree. As is wont to happen in such circumstances, many of the cafe's other customers gathered around to gawk at the scene. Murmurs of speculation rippled through the small crowd as we all watched the car's driver climb out and survey the damage, followed by gasps of shock and alarm as people noticed that her head was bleeding. One of the nearby employees went to call 911, and my date asked if we should try to help the woman. I was about to respond with my agreement, but the words never came out, largely because they were replaced by uproarious laughter. Please understand, I wasn't making light of the car crash. In fact, at the exact moment that I'd been encouraged to assist, I'd caught sight of something that my brain decided was too funny to ignore. From behind the wreckage, there came an enormous, almost spherical, man riding on a motorized bicycle. He looked to be about 50, had an expression of intense concentration on his face, and was moving so slowly that it really seemed like he should have toppled over. Each of the man's limbs were frozen in place, statue-like, as the dull whine of the vehicle's motor struggled to inch him forward. I don't know why I found that so amusing, but I couldn't stop myself from laughing. Tears of mirth clouded my vision, and no matter how hard I tried to restrain myself, I just couldn't stymie my amused outburst. Needless to say, it didn't make the best impression on the girl across the table from me, and I could feel the disapproving stares of the other patrons from all around. I did finally manage to explain what had caused me to break down like I had, but I'm not convinced that the young woman believed me. We didn't have a second date, but to be honest, I still chuckle to myself when I picture the man on his moped. TLDR. My first date with a girl was a little car wreck, but it also gave me my funniest memory. Not me, but I caused it. We had a teacher in the 10th grade who was gone for a bit, and upon her return was explaining to the class that her father had passed away and that's why she took time off. I wasn't paying attention to what she was saying, and neither was my friend across the room when I made a stupid face at him. He burst out laughing literally and she said her father had passed away. He couldn't even get words out to explain what had happened when the entire class was staring at him, including a disgusting look from the teacher. I was visiting family in Zimbabwe. A street peddler was trying to sell us goods as we walked to Vic Falls. Suddenly a small truck stopped and out popped a man in camo shouting and pointing an assault rifle in our direction. I thought it was directly at me, but it was at the man next to me. My response was uncontrollable laughter from stress. My cousin was not amused as this was the way it was in this country. I also was not amused, but I never explained why I burst out laughing. At a wedding, while the vows were being spoken, because some dude sitting in the pew in front of me farted, and no one else seemed to hear or acknowledge it, except for me, I couldn't stop laughing, and the +1 who was with me kept elbowing me to get me to stop, which made me laugh even more because she didn't know what I was laughing at. Was getting into the hearse on the way to my grandma's funeral. My sister had pulled out her phone, opened Pokemon Go, and was in the process of catching a Charizard next to the hearse driver's door. She noticed me staring, looked me dead in the eye and solemnly said, "Gotta catch 'em all." I mean, it is a Charizard. On the set of the show SEAL Team during a take. I'm a background actor, so I'm on lots of shows either just sitting somewhere or walking back and forth in the distance. I'm also a huge BoJack Horseman fan, so I think David Boreanaz is hilarious. I start laughing a little whenever a commercial of his comes on. So when I was supposed to be sitting there eating a fake meal during a take, he is having dialogue right behind me with all the cameras rolling and I just could not keep it together. Friend's sister came in and in a serious tone said Disco is dead, which made me chuckle. Then she told me Disco was a person. I didn't know this. I hit that awkward hysterical laughter and had to leave. My friend forgave me. His sister, understandably, not so much. Oh, man. I used to work in a call center, and on each call I had to inquire whether the customer had cavity wall and loft insulation already. On one call I accidentally asked somebody if they'd had their Captain Lovety waft, immediately bursting into an insane fit of giggles. Thankfully the person on the other end of the phone saw the funny side. Honestly, just typing that out now I'm having to suppress the giggles. I ended the call and had to take a break to let all of the giggles out and compose myself. Eventually I calmed down enough to make another phone call, and for whatever reason, as soon as the next person answered the phone I burst back into giggles. The customer was not impressed. I explained Captain Lovety waft and apologized to the guy, but he told me how unprofessional it was and that it made my company look bad etc etc. I apologized profusely but still couldn't really stop giggling. He hung up shortly after that, and TBH. Frick that guy, because Captain Lovety waft is hilarious. Jumbled up words always gets me. I was at McDonald's with some friends and one of them called the chicken McNuggets kickin' new guggets and I absolutely lost it for like half an hour. It was 6 AM after a LAN party and I was sleep deprived, so I have that excuse at least. Several years ago, working in a law firm, had a case where a gay couple with a civil union from another state were splitting up. New York didn't recognize the union. One party wanted to be in equity court, rather than law. Meeting with my boss about it and he drops the phrase, backdoor into equity. Friend of mine who was migrating a bunch of physical servers accidentally dropped I'm putting the P's into versus and went into a full jiggle fit. My mom had set her face on fire when I was in high school. While in the ambulance on the way to the hospital I was sitting in the front seat and looked at the dash and noticed there was a knob for the siren. I saw two labels. One was wail, the other yelp. I asked the driver if the third was shriek. This along with several other inappropriate quips gave me some really strange looks, but considering it was like 4 AM when it all went down and there wasn't an adult around I was just trying to hold it together. Jury duty. A serious 3-week trial of a serial child molester. For some reason, during closing, the prosecution thought it would be a good idea to demonstrate how a pantyhose mask changes a person's features. So they had the lead detective put on a pantyhose mask and walk sideways in front of the jury box. This guy sidestepping down the row of jurors was the most ridiculous thing ever. I was the first one to lose it, followed by the rest of the jury. We took a recess for a bit. At passport control in Canada, the guy was busting my butt for spending a lot of time in the Middle East. and I was like, "You are one to talk, Officer Abbas." Hahaha, he was not amused, but then we started talking about throwing tonies at strippers and he was happy. When I first met my husband's parents, they invited some of their extended family out for dinner. My husband's aunt told me this story. An elderly man they knew was island hopping in Indonesia and got into a small plane of about 10 people. The plane's engine failed, or something like that, haha, and its nose dived into the ocean. 9 passengers died. This man they knew was the only survivor and was picked up by a passing boat. He went into hospital where they were sure he was on his deathbed with pneumonia. After a month of being in hospital in a foreign country, his family demanded he be transported back home. After another month in hospital, finally he made a recovery and returned home. For his first breakfast back home, he asked that it be served on his balcony. He sat down on his chair on the balcony and waited for his breakfast to be served. The balcony fell off the house and he died. I think it was the phrasing "fell off the house" combined with nerves at meeting my husband's family for the first time, that made me completely lose my mind. I was wiping away tears. The worst part is that no one else heard the story, and when they asked the aunt what was so funny, she said I was just telling her how so and so passed away. Whoops. I am sure you left a good impression. Oh, finally one for me. High school gymnasium. Remembrance Day, maybe age 16. The entire student body crammed in for a memorial ceremony. We were approximately 10 seconds into the minute of silence for those who had fallen when a mentally handicapped is at the PC term. Student at the back started making terribly loud guttural screams. All 1,000 students or so, being polite and mature as they were, ignored it and the gym remained silent until I just couldn't take it anymore and burst out laughing. So it was him and his braying noises, and me and my inappropriate laughing. Needless to say, a teacher ran over and escorted me right out within what seemed to be seconds. Sat in the principal's office for the rest of the day, had detention the next. In retrospect, was it really that big a freaking deal? Humans are weird, we take ourselves too seriously sometimes. They definitely overreacted, in my opinion. I actually felt absolutely terrible for this, but I was at Game 6 of last year's playoffs between the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Boston Bruins, and they announced they were holding a moment of silence for the victims of the Toronto van attack. I went with my buddy from work and we had been drinking all day. Buddy wasn't listening to the announcement and right after it ended he yells, "Lucic gets fricked," the combination of his bizarre inflection, the following complete silence afterwards, and the fact that Milan Lucic, who he was referring to, hasn't played for the Bruins in years made my drunk butt cry laughing. I tried to stifle it but didn't do a good enough job, and after the silence a couple behind us were loudly exclaiming how unbelievably rude the two guys laughing were. I can't blame them all. LOL. Your buddy is wild. Chirping so publicly during a sport he clearly doesn't follow takes balls. I'm a medic. During a cardiac arrest, we're in the back of the truck working the guy, and the ambulance suddenly fills with a terrible smell. My partner says, "I think the patient just voided his bowels." Wow, that's awful. Me. No, I just farted. We both started laughing horribly and the guy driving the rig for us, a firefighter from one of the local departments, had no idea what was going on. We kept doing our job but I'm glad no family was around for it. Can you imagine the last thing you hear before you die is some dudes laughing at farts? In college, in a class with an incredibly uptight teacher, we were laughing at her reactions and I got told off for laughing as I was in sitting front of the whole entire class. It didn't help that I was covering my laughter with a giant face towel. MADD Impact Panel. An old lady fell asleep and snored incredibly loud as parents were telling the group about how their daughter was killed by a drunk driver. Everyone in the room was losing it, quietly, and the parents kept stopping mid-sentence to try to collect themselves. I felt pretty bad. While getting a ticket from a cop, he was a real jerk and took his job way too seriously. Honestly, I don't know what came over me but I couldn't help but start busting up laughing at him. Hint, don't do this. He yelled at me more. P.S. I also had my daughter in the car, and somehow it makes it doubly worse. I have done this before actually. I was having an exceedingly bad day when I got pulled over. Had to explain why I was laughing like a maniac after getting my ticket. Was less a funny laugh, more a frick my life right now laugh. my great-grandmother's funeral. She was very loved and there were almost 200 people packed into this funeral home, but we were in good spirits. She was a great woman and wouldn't want us sad. She was very sick anyway, so no one was truly shocked she passed. My uncle was sitting in the front row. I was in the second with my aunt, his sister. It was dead silent before the music started to play and I see my uncle look left and right. The front row was all pallbearers. He just turns around and says, "It looks like a Republican National Convention up here." I realize it's an entire row of 6-foot average weight 40-60-year-old white men all wearing the same suit. My aunt and I were choking back tears from laughing so hard. Completely couldn't catch my breath. Made the whole funeral go better. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.